All right, on this week's mini guitar lesson, I thought we would continue our dive into different chords and chord shapes by taking a look at augmented chords. Now, you may not be familiar with the term augmented chord, but I'd be willing to put money on the fact you probably have played an augmented chord, maybe not even realizing what that is. So what is an augmented chord? An augmented chord is where you take a basic triad, whether it's a major or minor triad, and you take your fifth and you raise it by one semitone or one half of a step. So what does that mean? Let's take a look at that. We're going to stay with the same chords we've been using for the past 2 weeks of exploration just for continuity's sake, but keep in mind these concepts apply to any chord that you're playing that is a triad that has a fifth in it. So let's start out by taking a look at the D chord, and I'm going to turn down just a little bit the sound we have here. So let's start by taking a look at a D minor chord. We're going to do this on a pretty clean setting. I'm using the Archetype Plenty plugin, yes, because I'm a Plenty fanboy, but also because this is my favorite neural DSP library, at least at the moment for most playing things. So let's start out by taking a look at a basic D minor chord. D minor sounds like this. I'm sure you're familiar with it. How do we spell out that chord? How is that chord made? Well, the notes of a D minor chord are, starting out, open fourth string, a D. Third string, second fret, an A. Second string, third fret, another D, an octave higher. And first string, first fret, a F, or an F, pardon me, not to make it sound confusing. So D minor. D, A, D, F. Turn that guy down just a smidge more. All right, so remember I said to make it into an augmented chord, we take our fifth and we raise that by one half of a step. Now, we've talked about what that means as far as our fifths and thirds previously, going all the way back to episode 1 of Everything Guitar, where we explored the basic major scale. But just for a quick review, if this is your first time watching and you're not familiar with music theory and the different notes, in Western music, we have 7 notes. We have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then we start back over with A. So, each one of those notes is represented by a number, 1 through 7. Now, that doesn't mean your 1 is always your A and your 3 is always your C. Whatever note you're playing, whatever note you're starting with, which is called your root note, that is going to be your 1. So if you're playing in the key of D, if you're playing a D chord, a D minor like we did, your 1 or your first note, because where you're starting, is D. So you count up then consecutively. So if your 1 is D, 2 would be an E, 3 would be an F, 4 would be a G, 5 would be an A, 6 would be a B, and your 7th would be a C. Now, that doesn't mean they're just a straight C, straight A, straight B, and so on. It can be a B flat, a C sharp, depending on what key you're in. But for sake of simplicity today, let's just stay with those A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and those being the consecutive notes 1 through 7, depending on where you're starting. So in the key of D, your root or your 1 is D. So if we count up, remember I said for an augmented chord, our fifth gets raised a semitone or one half a step. So if we're in D, let's count up. D is 1, E is 2, F is 3, G is 4, and our 5 would be an A. So let's go back and look at our D minor chord again. We said the notes of that are D, A, D, and F. So we know that 5 is an A. Well, in this chord, where's our A? That is our middle finger. That is fret number 2 on the 3rd string, an A. So if we want to make this an augmented, a D augmented, we need to raise that note, our A, by 1 semitone or by 1 half of a step. So instead of playing an A, we play an A sharp or B flat, depending on what you want to call it. So what that does to our chord is it adds some tension to our chord. Instead of sounding like this, which a D minor is kind of a sad sounding chord, but it sounds like it has some resolution. Like, even though it's sad, I picture that D minor chord almost like we're sighing. We're kind of sad and we're resolved to our fate. So, okay, here we are. Now, if we make that into a D minor augmented, we raise that fifth from an A to a B flat, it adds some weird tension to it. Listen to the difference between this, our D minor, and our D minor augmented, raising our A by just sliding our second finger up 1 fret to the 3rd fret to a B flat. You hear how it doesn't quite have that resolution. You don't quite get that sigh, that kind of calming, resigned, we're done, here we are. It gives you a little bit of a questioning kind of, what's going on here? D minor resolves. Sad, we're resigned to our fate. We're kind of like, here we are. D minor augmented. Something sounds uneasy, something doesn't feel quite right. So augmented chords are really good at that, for kind of adding that uneasy, disquieting kind of feeling. So D minor, once again, spelled D-A-D-F, played 4th string, 3rd string, 2nd string, 1st string. Frets, open, 2nd fret with our middle finger. 3rd fret on the 2nd string with our 3rd finger. 1st fret on the 1st string with our 1st finger. So D minor augmented, we take that 2nd finger on the 3rd string, on fret 2, we slide it up 1 fret to fret 3. All right, so D minor augmented. Now let's take a look, and let's look at a G bar chord, because this has been one of our chords we've been using as an example as we've been exploring different chord voicings and different chord shapes. So going to a D minor, or a G minor, pardon me, bar chord, that it sounds like this, and that's spelled out with our 1st finger barred across all 6 strings on the 3rd fret. That is a G, is our root note. Then we have our 3rd finger on the 5th fret of the 5th string, that's a D. We have our pinky on the 5th fret of the 4th string, that is a G, so that's an octave. We have our 1st finger barred across the 3rd fret of string 3, that gives us a B flat, which is a common note we just saw with our D augmented. Then we have that same 1st finger barred across the 3rd fret of string 2, which gives us a D. And then we have our string 1, 3rd fret, which gives us a G 2 octaves higher. So, G minor bar chord. Well, remember what we just said. To make this an augmented chord, we need to look for our 5th, and we need to raise that 1 semitone or 1/2 a step. So let's do the math and let's walk through it together. If we're in G, our 1, or our root note, remember, is the note we start with, which is G. So then our 2nd would be A, our 3rd would be B, our 4th would be C, and our 5th would be D. So the notes we just said, where is our D that we're playing? If this is our G, we said this note, fret 5, string 5, is a D. So there's our 5th. Root, 5, octave. So what we want to do is we want to raise that 5th fret on string 5 from a D to a D sharp. You can automatically hear how that sounds kind of, that transition from there to there has got a little bit of a disquieting, kind of eerie feel to it. So now how do we play that? Well, obviously if we're playing a bar chord like this, it's going to be kind of hard to put our 3rd finger, our ring finger, up there on fret number 6. So what we can do is when we're planning ahead, we can invert or switch these 2 fingers. So now we have 3rd fret barred across all 6 strings with our index finger. For our 5th fret, or D, in a standard or G minor bar chord, let's use our pinky on fret number 5. And let's use our ring finger on fret number 5 of string 4. So we just switch those 2. Instead of looking like this, they look like this. Same sound, still a G minor, but we've changed the fingering. What that allows us to do then is we can take our pinky, slide that up to fret number 6, our D sharp, and automatically there is our G augmented. So G, G augmented. So use those augmented chords. Like I said, they can add a little bit of eeriness, a little bit of unease or disquieting. It also can make for some very interesting, very cool arpeggiated chord movements. If you do something going back to that D minor, if you start in your D minor and then you raise that up to a D minor augmented, it gives you something that sounds like this. So, augmented chords, there you go. Continue to tune in next week where we'll dive further into some additional chord shapes and some different chord voicings to expand our vocabulary and hopefully increase the interest level of our writing.